Hey, you going? It's Jonno, and I'm with you here today because I had a brilliant idea. I thought I would take a look at all of the houses that bump into my Trade Me inbox every day. I like to try and keep a track of what's going on in the housing market because, kind of working it by what do? I go and tell people whether the house is any good or not. There's a whole bunch of things that you can learn just by looking online, and I figured, what the heck, I'll start to try and share that information. So, what I've done over here is I have pulled up all of the listings within the email. And of course, in saying that, then I kill them, what the heck. Not that one. It must be that one. No, not that one. Not that one. Must be that one. Look at that. There we go. So, the important part here is that we can see, Cool. Right. It's a little bit new, this setup for me. Sunny character, home with great views. It's a deadline sale courtesy of Anne Fitzgibbon Park at Edinburgh. So we look at that and I see a 1920s-ish house, house on garage. Now that can be interesting. It depends when they added it. Looking at the wee retaining wall there, what I can see is that it was probably designed like that from the word go. They probably built that house around the garage. Now that's not always the case, but if your garage doors look like that, that's a pretty big clue. Now, details of the house. I'm doing this on the fly. This is the first time I've ever looked at this one, but let's just quickly read. LED light windows, ornate plaster ceilings, amazing sea views, low maintenance, recently repainted exterior, upgraded kitchen, bathroom, 2 or 3 bedroom, plus sunroom, open plan, kitchen, dining, living, formal, very sunny, kept cozy and warm with heat pump and good insulation. A great home for entertaining with children to play in a child-friendly section. Child-friendly kind of means it's fenced, which, well, yeah, I suppose it is up the back there. The view, we don't care too much about the view really, but what that does tell us is that it's got sun exposure and it's also got air exposure. Sun and air exposure are really some of the critical things for a house to stay in good condition. It's pretty, vital that they get those things. Air obviously helps to prevent, mold, mildew, lichen starting to grow. Oh, not necessarily lichen, but certainly a lot of the green mold that you can get in a lot of places in Dunedin, especially if it stays a bit damp. And of course, airflow removes dampness, hence. Let's have a look at the kitchen here, see what they've done. All right. So there's a bunch you can tell about a kitchen just by looking. So what are we seeing here? Even though it looks like marble, it's probably not. It is probably just a Formica bench. Now, there's nothing wrong with a Formica bench. If it's well installed and well sealed, it's mint. And we can see what looks like a ceiling line just down here. The stove is actually a pretty good place to look. It sort of gives you a real good hint as to how much money they've spent. So one of the things I'd always be checking on a house like this is, does that stove have flame out protection? It's one of the things that makes a world of difference. If obviously the flame blows out and the gas is still running, you can fill a house up with gas. Could potentially do nasty things to people. The other thing that you're always looking at is, have they got the extractor there? Certainly with gas, much more important. And a pro recommendation is put in some carbon dioxide sensors, carbon monoxide sensors, and gas sensors. Now, Nest makes a whole bunch. There's about 3 or 4. Brooks is an Australian outfit that makes a bunch of different smoke alarm combined sensors that link. I'm a very big advocate of linked sensors. I've had a house fire. It sucks. We weren't there at the time, but if we were, by crikey, our house was long and narrow, and if it appears that the fire started up the parents' end of the house, but would we have gotten to the kids in time? A few extra minutes would have been critical. So the flooring in here, it's pretty hard to tell from here whether it's engineered hardwood or vinyl. I'm suspecting vinyl because they're narrow boards rather than wider ones. But as we go through, we can see it looks pretty tidy. They've done it recently. It's nice. Now, it's a bit hard to tell from these photos alone, but when I'm looking at a ceiling, I'm looking, hey, is there any sags? Is there any stains? Is there any cracks? Oftentimes the paint will crack just a little bit, but there's no underlying damage. It's just the fact that the paint's been on there for near on 100 years. This is a very common house structure in Dunedin. Oftentimes what you'll find is the floor will be a little bit out of level by the bay window. Now, I've never quite got to the bottom of that, but it seems that out of plane is the issue. Doesn't matter too much. Now here you can see they've certainly opened it up, but in opening it up they've used a solid beam structure. And one of the things I quite like, as you see me running the mouse down here on the sides, instead of just putting a beam from one wall to another wall, which obviously makes the structure just a little bit weak, they've actually given that beam adequate internal support by leaving timber in the corners. And if the beam runs all the way from the outside to the outside, that's great. Now, when we do it today, we use brackets, and the other difference oftentimes is piles. You'll often add piles directly below where the beam load is born, just to ensure that you've got full support, full force held down to ground without any cantilevers or room to see the floor move, basically. Coming on through, personally I'm a big proponent of, keeping native timber where you've got it, and obviously they've got timber panelling in the atrium there. The windowsills is a big place for maintenance. Keep your windowsills in good order. Here's a kitchen from another angle. Look, it's small. The other thing that you'll find with this kitchen being red is that it's going to soak up a lot of light. They have put high mount, there's a proper word for it, it's not coming to me. They've built in the top of the cabinetry, which isn't a bad thing. It means less cleaning, as long as their lights are well laid out to fit. Sometimes people lay out lights as if in an empty room and forget that having a tall cabinet with a light really close to it could potentially cast quite a shadow. Sink location there probably makes good use of the space while I think about it. And a top mount sink is much easier to seal than an under mount. We're back to the lounge again here, and a bedroom with the stained glass window. One of the things I always check with the stained glass windows is, are all of the solder joints still tight? Into bedrooms, you can see here, a bit interesting to have a high mount power point like that. Typically in bedrooms, power points are down lower. They're in about 300, 400 mil off the ground, so that you can hide them behind things. The good thing about having them higher is that you can't have a plug pushed out by a bed, or squash the tip and have arcing or anything like that. Come on through now. In the wee front porch there, they've made an office space. I mean, look, spaces like that can be pretty good. As a utility space, you're allowed to do pretty much whatever you like with it. You're not allowed to necessarily rent that out as a bedroom, so that's something to bear in mind. Bathroom, this is the classic bathroom reno in Dunedin. It's got these the diamond tile pattern vinyl. What's interesting here is that they've got a half height bath splash surround, which from the photo I can't actually tell what it's made of. Normally they're acrylic. Can we see much of the detailing? Not a huge amount. One thing I'd really like to point out, which is fantastic here, they actually have a solid shower box instead of just a shower over bath. And a shower over bath next to a window is always a bit of a nightmare for waterproofing. The window almost always suffers, and typically when you're in that situation, here you'd get away with a glass splash screen if you tried, but it'd be a bit tricky. Oftentimes what people do is they just put shower curtains in. I'm not a fan of shower curtains. They always run water down here and it leaks and you get a little soft spot. It's as reliable as clockwork. Also cool that they fitted a big mirror. Big mirrors can make a huge difference to the perceived size of the space. Now, we can't see around the corner on the shower there, but I'd warrant that it's two sides glass. And generally speaking, the main thing to remember with showers is to make sure that the silicone on the outside is good. Now, specifically, this bottom corner in here is the most likely to leak because that's where the shower sprays towards. Now, silicone doesn't last forever. It's about a 5-year lifespan if you're the average person. If you keep it really clean, you can extend that quite a lot. But most people, in my experience, are in too much of a rush, really, to clean their bathrooms to sparkling each and every day. Heck, I don't. As we come out here, it's kind of good that they've got sectional concrete here. You can see that's minimised some of the cracking in some of these big panels, but you've still got some cracking and crazing over here. You do expect cracking in concrete. Now, the fencing that they've got there, because they've got two different sheets of iron with a lap, it really sticks out. So if you wanted to improve this, one of the things you could do would be to just whip down that iron and put something new up. Make sure it's got a clean line along the top. Even if you have to cut it on an angle, that's fine. Clean lines look good, whereas just straight iron sticking up into the air always looks just a bit naff. Not sure what this wire running across here is, but we won't figure that one out unless we go have a look. Now, it's when you see photos like this that you think, by crikey, hurry up and underground all of the power. Now, underground power has its issues, but look at the view. And if there's no wires in the way, that view becomes fantastic. And saying that, the brain gets pretty good at screening the wires out. So, handrails, concrete, very handy actually when it's frosty and we're in Dunedin after all. What's the other things you're going to need to think about on this house? Now, I can't quite see it very well from here. Let's just try and zoom in a bit on the photo. Oh, no, it's not letting me. Fine, be that way. The gables, keeping the gables in good order. They're fairly well protected by the eaves, but keeping them in good order makes a world of difference. You can also see some dichromatic tiles remaining on the bay window, but I suspect you'll find the roof itself is actually corrugated iron now, as often happens. There we go, that's house number 1, gone through. Took me a long time. Let's see if we can do a faster job for house number 2. House number 2, new listing, something extra. Right, slightly newer vintage, 40s, 50s. That looks like concrete tiles to me. Now, concrete tiles are pretty good as long as the point work remains in good order and as long as the seal remains in good order. When they start growing lichen, you've got a problem. You've got to kill that. Now, one way to do that is bleach and water. As we go through, you can see a little bit of a crack here on the front. I say retaining / fence. It's hardly retaining anything, so it's not really a big issue. But it is something just to bear in mind. If you want to keep it tidy, you might find you have to rebuild a retaining wall. Pattern ceilings, those could be fibrous plaster, or they could actually be Pinex. You do strike the odd Pinex one out. Pinex shows up moisture a lot better than fibrous plaster, but fibrous plaster will show it eventually if there's a continual leak. So timber like this that you see extended down there, that's almost always decorative. They hardly ever make a structural member out of something like that. So ultimately, if you want to restore it to a more modern look, you can remove the timber, remove the slats, and you generally get away with it, with minor modifications, of course. Same thing goes in here. Kitchen, now that's got newer handles on it, probably about in the last 5 years, 5, 10 maybe. You can see that the vinyl, though it's coved up the kickboard, is not actually fully coved. It's just a flat strip on edge versus a flat strip down there. If you're a bit of a messy dishwasher, as I find myself to be sometimes, it can help to silicone this little gap down here. Oh, that's too many photos. Got to skip through one by one. Okay, oh, maybe we were. What do you know? Okay, bedrooms, aluminium windows, single glazed, 80s vintage-ish. Ceilings, okay. Interesting how they've taken out that wee wall there. Whether that used to be a whole separate bedroom or what, we're not sure. So you'd be checking that on a limb. You have your frosted glass here. Is it safety glass or not is one of the big questions. It doesn't have to be if it's already in, but if you ever do break it, you're going to need to replace it with safety glass. You can see here the toilet's a bit of an older one. That sort of dates it through to 80s, 90s that this was tidied up. The vanity you'll probably find is swollen a little bit in places, and the shower, as you can see, it's just a stalk rather than a rail. The rails are fantastic because they allow tall people to shower easier. Actually, the built-in walls on showers like this are generally pretty good. The main thing that matters is the detail on the bottom of the cladding. Does it have a drippy edge, or is the lining, shower lining, touching the shower tray? If it is, then it can soak a bit of water up. Not necessarily the end of the world, but it's just something to bear in mind. All in all, you look at this and you go, okay, varnished sills require more maintenance than painted sills, so you're always going to keep that in the back of your mind. Once a year, you run around with a little bit of sandpaper and a pot of water-based varnish, and you stick a new coat on top. Typically, it's about 100mm up this side, and the whole bottom edge, 100mm up, is what you need to do as regular maintenance, and then occasionally you redo the whole thing when it starts to fade or whatever else, or crack or peel. Now, this is interesting. They took the photos without the light on, but the light's been a bit spotty because of that. So the kitchen has got these multiple height changes. It's not really well laid out for your fridge, obviously, and your basins. It's almost like they've tried to make it accessible for someone in a wheelchair, except you can't get under it or beside it for that matter. Maybe they were just very short. There's no rule on kitchen height, strangely enough, although we are very much used to a finished kitchen height of about 930mm, because that's what cabinetry generally works out to. For maximum cut yield. Door to outside, that looks like it is protected with a wee veranda. Shower curtains, we talked about. If the shower curtains are like that, it almost certainly means it's a wet floor. The main thing is just to check the vinyl's not blowing. It's not bubbling or missing anywhere. Make sure that the seam sealing is actually sealed and they haven't missed any spots. Obviously, wherever there's showers or toilets, I try and get underneath and have a look if at all I can. If there's insulation in the way, it makes it a bit tricky. We're not allowed to remove it. The issue you'll potentially have here again, window next to a shower. I mean, if they don't shut the shower curtains, then you'll get splashback on the cabinetry there and on the window. If they do shut the curtains, well, it'll probably keep it in. The real pro tip is just keep a squeegee in there so that you can squeegee the floor dry again afterwards. So we see on the exterior here, we have something resembling a separation detail between, well, we appear to have something resembling a separation detail from the concrete to the cladding, which is great. When concrete's poured up against cladding, that's a bit of a pain. Sometimes it's okay, but generally speaking, you want to avoid it. In this case, it's good. It's a good detail. You can see vent plates, so that means we've got some subfloor ventilation. We've probably also got subfloor access here, which is not entirely common in Dunedin. And we've been through, oh, we haven't seen that one. There we go, a little bit of timber tongue and groove lining. Again, that's fine. Some people view that as a fire risk. Look, realistically, it's not really. Jib can burn if there's a fire hot enough. What you're trying to do with fire resistance is buy enough time to get out. You're not trying to stop fires outright because, well, unless you build your house completely out of concrete, you just can't. And that is all the photos for that house. Standing tall, living large. Whoa, 2-story. He's got a drip edge detail around the added second story. I think the second story is added. It could well be, though, that this end is added to the house because that's a slightly newer vintage of construction to what this is by the looks. Only the limb will tell, of course. Trees all around the show. Effectively, one thing you're always going to have to think of with this house is you've effectively got 3 stories worth of maintenance there. Now, that's pretty tall when it comes time to clean the gutters or paint the walls, paint the windows. As long as you bear that in mind, it's not a bad thing. And you can actually buy your own scaffold and you'll get up to sort of that level there, which means you can paint everything you need to with the aid of a extendable handle on a paintbrush or paint roller for that matter. Carpet, they've obviously just cleaned fairly recently in this photo, and by cleaned I mean professionally cleaned. Walls, all fairly nice consistent colour. Now, paint colour is one of the really hard things to, and quality is hard to deduce from photographs, but what we can see here is they've spent some money in terms of fittings, in terms of wallpaper, in terms of, well, the lights are a bit older, but even light fittings over here. So that's generally a good clue that they have looked after it. Again, they've spent extra money here on bigger handles. They cost quite a bit more, but they've spent the money to try and keep it up and to try and hold to a higher standard. When people do that, they generally tend to look after their stuff. Lots of pointable LEDs by the looks. Now, older, so 80s-ish conservatory, very, very famous, very, very common from that era. Look, the conservatories are pretty good, and realistically, if they leak, it doesn't typically matter because they're typically on a concrete foundation on this sort of setup, whereas on ground level. The main thing is to make sure that the sealants down the edges stay good, that the flashing under here is good, that what you tend to find oftentimes, this is glass by the looks, but a lot of these are twin wall, which can get crummy stuff inside it. Now, twin wall's pretty cheap, pretty easy to replace. Actually, you'll spend more money on the rubber seals than you will on the twin wall. Well, depending on how it's all laid out. You can go to glaziers to get that rubber seal if you want. The twin wall you can buy online, or generally I found it cheapest to do that. You can order it from any hardware store. Twin wall is the stuff that looks like real estate signs, but it's clear or tinted sort of colours. So yeah, the main comment on this house is always going to be getting access up this back edge. It's going to be a bit tricky, but with this view, you can see that you've got the full carport there. Will the carport be strong enough to set up scaffold on? I'm not sure. You'd have to look at how it's fixed to the wall down here. Brick fencing is all good, no real issues with that. Emerson Street, Concord. And that looks like a sear gas fire if I had to make a guess. So again, we're just going to check the limb, check that's all done. We can see that we've got fibre set up. You're going to check the rollers on those are kind of like French doors over there. They could be ranch sliders. They look like ranch sliders, but again, a little bit hard to tell from this photograph. Kitchen, again, with the second view of it, it's all pretty good. Very white. I don't think that's a bad thing. Now, fluorescent lights, they're legitimate, and there's heaps of them. The downside is some people find they get a headache when they've just got fluorescents, but the wiring's already there. If you want to change them out for incandescents, that's no problem. It's easy enough to do. One of the great questions about this area down here is there a height difference between the ground outside on the carport and this? If it has got the height difference, then you're away laughing. If it hasn't, generally speaking, you're probably still away laughing, because if there's a carport up against it, you're not going to get water in there anyway. Heat pumps. Now, heat pumps, you need to maintain those suckers. They don't maintain themselves. So that means cleaning the filters in this end once every 6 weeks, 2 months. And it also means getting a full service every 2 years, year, depending on how much you use them. What that does is cleans the radiators out, makes them run way more efficiently, and makes them last a lot longer. So you're saving power, they last longer, and they just run better. They warm up room faster, cool it down faster. Totally worth the money. You can see you've got a handrail running up the stairs here, but those stairs do look a bit narrow. Now, it's hard to say. I mean, again, this is an older house, so you can't expect a full 280 mil that we'd expect now on a stairwell width. But as long as the handrail's there and it's all consented, then yeah, you're pretty well hunky-dory. I think that's a heat pump. It is, rather than a night store. Night stores used to be useful, not so much anymore. Windows we talked about before, showers we talked about before. I like this detail here. See, they've got a gap under the bath, so that means you've got a drip edge. If water does trickle down the outside of the bath, it's going to form on a drip edge and fall on the vinyl rather than fall into the gap and rot timber. Location of the bathroom matters, and obviously you're checking all of the edges of the shower and around the drain from the ceiling below if this is anywhere not on the ground floor, for evidence of water and leakage. Room like this, the only thing we can see here that's of note is the older style power point. It may have been rewired, it may not have, but that power point's new enough that it's probably still TPS, albeit our rigs have changed a little bit and improved a little bit, but there shouldn't be any requirement to rewire if that's what the whole house is done in. You might find you need to replace the odd switch. Feature walls. Right, well, that's that house done and gone through. Is it a good one? Yeah, probably pretty sweet. This here again, brick, good eaves, fundamentals we're looking for are fantastic. Now, the deck's probably a bit too high technically, but again, it doesn't really matter. Decks don't tend to hold water, so I'm pragmatic on that point. Some requirements say it's 100 mil down from the house, but reality says whatever. If a deck's not consentable, then it can be built wherever. Again, as long as water can't get into the house, that's the idea. And you don't really want the wet timber touching unprotected timber underneath the door either. Again, in this house, you're going to be checking that the ranch loader rollers work well. Your lounge looks reasonable. There's not much to comment on there. You've got off-street parking, which in Dunedin's not as common as you'd think. Mono-clad walls. So finding out exactly what the cladding is. How do we do that? We measure a windowsill or a door sill. If the whole width of the wall is about 100 to 115 mil, well, you've got 90 to 100 mil worth of framing. You've got 10 odd mil worth of jib lining on the inside typically. And then what's left dictates what the cladding is. If it's about 6 mil, then you're probably a direct fix Hardy Tex or something like that. 6 to 10 mil, I should say. If you're about 35 mil, you're probably just straight stucco. It all goes from there. 22.50. This is going way too long. I need to do it much faster. So what we're going to do here, I think we'll continue through this house. I'm not going to go through them all because we'll be at it all day and I'll never get it posted. Timber down there, the odds are very good that your sophites in here are polite, which will contain asbestos, so don't go drilling it. Keep the paint in good order. Try not to water blast and you'll be away laughing. You can use a soft bristled brush. Because it's bricks, you don't really need to wash, but in saying that, it's still a good idea too. It just helps keep everything looking nice, really, if nothing else. Looks to be a concrete slab if I had to guess, but it is a bit of a guess, admittedly. That might not be back there. So again, around the toilet, you're just checking that the toilet doesn't rock and roll. Timber down around this, you're checking. Now, the detail here is such that you're expecting there to be some damage to the windowsill and possibly further down. Very curious about this is, obviously the showers are very much an add-on. They haven't planned for it all, so there's nothing watertight around here. There's probably no splash screen back here, and there's certainly, you know, shower rail, maybe whatever else, I'm not sure. I'd be looking at doing something with that, simply because it's not an ideal situation. Even if it hasn't caused any rot or damage, it is gonna at some point. Okay. Fencing. A bit of new fencing there, a bit of old fencing, yeah, no big deal. Again, ranch loader, does the ranch loader work? Decking, are there any nails pulled up? Is it move when you stand on it? Other than that, not a bunch that you're looking at. Pretty good warehouse. And I'm going to call that a day. That's 3 houses and hopefully a whole bunch of good value for you to pick up if you listen through and just try and get a picture for what I'm looking at. I'm going to try and hone this a little bit and keep delivering some of these whenever I get these emails from Trade Me, which is every day. We'll see how we go.